Ella took a deep breath as she stepped into the cafe. It was her first day in London, and the menu in front of her looked like a puzzle of unfamiliar words. "I can do this," she whispered. But as she approached the counter, her mind went blank. The barista smiled, waiting for her order. A rush of nervousness filled her, but then she remembered her plan, step by step, one word at a time. Welcome to English Tone, where learning English becomes easy and fun. If you want to improve your English step by step, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Now, let's dive into our story. Ella had always dreamed of moving to London. The idea of living in a vibrant city surrounded by history, modern skyscrapers, and a melting pot of cultures thrilled her. She had spent years imagining herself strolling through Hyde Park, sipping coffee in cozy cafes, and working in a high-rise office with a breathtaking view of the Thames. But there was one problem: English. She had studied it in school for years, memorizing grammar rules, passing exams, and writing essays. Yet, whenever she tried to speak, her tongue felt heavy, her mind blank. The words she knew so well on paper seemed to vanish when she needed them the most. She was afraid of speaking, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of embarrassing herself. When she finally moved to London, reality hit her harder than she had expected. The city was exactly as she had dreamed: beautiful, bustling, and full of opportunities. But the language barrier made everything 10 times harder. Ella arrived at Heathrow Airport with a suitcase full of dreams. The moment she stepped off the plane, she was surrounded by the sound of fast-spoken English. Announcements echoed through the airport. Flight attendants wished passengers a pleasant stay, and strangers conversed casually around her. It was overwhelming. At the immigration desk, the officer asked, "Purpose of your visit?" Ella froze. She knew the answer. She had rehearsed it 100 times, but her voice refused to cooperate. After an awkward silence, she finally managed, I am studying. No, I am studying. I will study." The officer raised an eyebrow, but stamped her passport anyway. That was her first realization. Knowing English and speaking it confidently were two different things. Her first challenge came right after she left the airport. She needed to take a taxi to her rented apartment. She had written down the address, but when she handed it to the driver, he glanced at her through the rearview mirror and asked, "Which route would you prefer?" Ella panicked. She hadn't prepared for this question. She had no idea about the routes. She hesitated before saying, any. You go." The driver gave her a puzzled look, but started the journey anyway. Ella sank into her seat, feeling defeated. The next few days were no different. Grocery shopping was a nightmare. She walked into a supermarket and picked up a few essentials, but when she reached the cashier, the lady asked, "Would you like a bag?" Ella stared at her, tried to process the words. "Would you like?" she repeated in her head. She understood the words individually, but together they confused her. The cashier waited, her expression patient but expectant. Ella felt the pressure building. She panicked and said, "Yes." The cashier nodded and scanned the items. "That'll be £5 and 20 pence." Ella looked at the screen, thankful she didn't have to ask her to repeat it. She handed over a £10 note. The cashier gave her the change and said something that sounded like, "Have a nice day." Ella mumbled, "Yes, thank you," and rushed out of the store, her heart pounding. Even the simplest interactions felt like an exam she wasn't prepared for. Ordering food was another struggle. She wanted to try traditional British dishes, but looking at menus filled with unfamiliar words was intimidating. One afternoon, she walked into a cafe, determined to order by herself. She had practiced her lines beforehand. "I'd like a cup of coffee, please." Simple, easy. But when she reached the counter, the barista greeted her cheerfully. "Hi there. What can I get for you today?" Ella panicked. This wasn't part of her script. The words got stuck in her throat. She pointed at a random item on the menu and whispered, "This." The barista nodded. "Sure. Would you like that with oat milk or regular milk?" More questions. More panic. She didn't understand what oat milk meant, but instead of asking, she just nodded again. "That'll be £3.50. She quickly paid and stepped aside, her face burning with embarrassment. She had barely spoken, yet she felt exhausted. Later, she searched online, "What is oat milk?" She learned that it was a plant-based alternative, and she laughed at herself. Why didn't I just ask, she thought. But deep down, she knew why. She was too afraid of looking foolish. One evening, Ella got lost on her way home. She had taken a wrong turn and ended up in an unfamiliar neighborhood. Her phone battery was low, and she had no choice but to ask someone for directions. She spotted a kind-looking elderly woman walking her dog and decided to approach her. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. The woman turned to her with a warm smile. Ella took a deep breath. "I lost my way," she said, her voice shaky. The woman nodded encouragingly. "Where are you trying to go, dear?" Ella fumbled for the words. "My home is near big shop with green sign." The woman chuckled softly. "Do you mean the Tesco on Baker Street?" Ella recognized the name and eagerly nodded. "Yes, Tesco, Baker Street." The woman pointed in the right direction. "Go straight for 2 blocks, then turn left. You'll see it." "Thank you. Thank you," Ella said, relief washing over her. As she walked away, she realized something important. Despite her broken English, the woman had understood her, and that was what truly mattered. Ella's struggles continued for weeks. Every interaction felt like an obstacle. She avoided speaking whenever she could, choosing instead to nod or gesture. She felt frustrated, lonely, and sometimes even questioned if she had made the right decision in coming to London. One night, she called her mother. "I don't think I can do this," she admitted, her voice filled with disappointment. "Speaking English is so hard. I feel like a child learning to talk again." Her mother listened patiently and then said something that changed everything. "Ella, remember when you were little, learned to ride a bike? You fell many times before you got it right. But did you give up?" Ella shook her head. "No. Language is the same," her mother said gently. "You have to fall, make mistakes, and get up again. No one expects you to be perfect. Just keep trying." Those words stayed with Ella. For the first time, she realized that making mistakes wasn't a failure. It was part of the learning process. She made a promise to herself. She would keep trying, step by step. Little did she know, this mindset would change everything. Her struggle wasn't over, but she was ready to face it with a new attitude. Determined to improve, Ella started small. She realized that fluency wouldn't come overnight, but she could take one step at a time. Instead of overwhelming herself with complex grammar rules and long sentences, she focused on practical, everyday phrases. Her first goal was mastering polite expressions and simple requests. She compiled a list of essential phrases like, "Can I have?" "Excuse me, where is?" "I would like." "How much does this cost?" "Could you please repeat that?" Every morning, Ella stood in front of her mirror and practiced aloud. She wanted to train her tongue to form the words naturally. At first, her pronunciation felt awkward and she stumbled over certain sounds. But she reminded herself that practice made progress. She dedicated an hour every day to speaking aloud. She would look around her room and name objects in English. She would form simple sentences like, "I have a blue chair," or "My window is open." These small exercises helped her build confidence. She also listened to English speakers online. She watched YouTube videos where people ordered food, asked for directions, or had basic conversations. She mimicked their tone, pace, and pronunciation. She even recorded herself speaking and played it back to identify areas for improvement. One morning, after days of practice, Ella decided to put her learning to the test. She walked to the same cafe where she had panicked before. This time, she was prepared. She took a deep breath, stepped up to the counter, and said, "Can I have a cappuccino, please?" The barista smiled and replied, "Sure, regular or large." Ella hesitated for a moment, but quickly recovered. "Regular, please. That'll be £3." She handed over the money and received her change without fumbling. When the barista handed her the cup, she even managed to say, "Thank you. Have a nice day." It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. For the first time, she had ordered something without freezing up. She left the cafe with a proud smile on her face. Encouraged by her success, Ella began applying her new phrases everywhere. When shopping, she would ask, "How much is this?" When looking for an item, she'd say, "Excuse me, where can I find?" One evening, she was at the supermarket when an elderly man asked her, "Do you know where the dairy section is?" Ella's first instinct was panic, but she quickly composed herself and responded, "I think it's over there, near the bread section." The man nodded. "Thank you." Ella beamed. She had successfully spoken to a stranger. Despite her progress, Ella still made mistakes. One day, she wanted to buy apples at a fruit stall. She approached the vendor and said, "Can I have 3 apples, please?" The vendor smiled and replied, "Sure, which kind?" Ella blinked. She hadn't considered that there would be different types of apples. "A red?" The vendor chuckled. "We have Gala, Fuji, and Pink Lady." Ella laughed nervously. Fuji, please." The vendor handed her the apples, and she left, feeling both amused and proud. She had managed to hold a conversation, even though she hadn't known all the words. She realized that mistakes were part of learning. Every time she stumbled, she gained valuable experience. The key was not to let fear hold her back. With her confidence growing, Ella decided to expand her vocabulary. She made flashcards with new words and phrases, carrying them in her bag so she could practice on the go. She labeled items in her apartment in English, fridge, mirror, door, to reinforce learning. She also started keeping a journal in English, writing about her day in simple sentences. "Today, I went to the park. The weather was nice. I saw a squirrel." Writing helped her structure her thoughts in English and improve her sentence formation. One afternoon, Ella's neighbor, Sarah, invited her over for tea. Sarah was a kind, talkative woman who spoke clearly and patiently. Ella was nervous, but decided to accept the invitation. As they sat in Sarah's cozy kitchen, Sarah asked, "So, how are you finding London?" Ella hesitated, but then with a deep breath said, "It is very nice. I like it here." Sarah smiled. "That's great. Have you visited any landmarks yet?" Ella thought for a moment. "Not many, but I went to Tower Bridge." "Oh, that's a wonderful place. What did you think of it?" Ella searched for the right words. "It was big and beautiful." Sarah laughed. "Yes, it is. You're doing great with your English, by the way." Ella blushed, but felt a surge of pride. A native speaker had complimented her English. It was proof that her efforts were paying off. Ella knew she still had a long way to go, but she had taken her first step. She was no longer afraid to speak, even if she made mistakes. She had learned that communication was more important than perfection. With each small victory, she felt more at home in London. She was determined to keep learning step by step. One day, while wandering through the charming streets of London, Ella stumbled upon a small bookstore tucked between a cafe and a florist. Its wooden sign read, "Sophie's Books, a place for dreamers." Intrigued, she stepped inside, inhaling the comforting scent of aged paper and fresh coffee. The store had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with novels, travel guides, and poetry collections. Behind the counter stood Sophie, the bookstore owner, a woman with kind blue eyes and a warm smile. "Hello there." Sophie greeted, her voice light and welcoming. Ella hesitated for a moment before responding. Hello. I'm looking for English books. Sophie's eyes twinkled. You're learning English? That's wonderful. Don't worry about mistakes. Just speak. Ella felt a surge of encouragement. She took a deep breath. Yes, I'll learn English. I want book, easy English. Sophie nodded and led her to a section labeled Beginner English Reads. These books are great for learners. Simple words, short sentences, and interesting stories. Ella picked up one with a colorful cover. This good? Sophie smiled. Yes, that one's perfect. It has stories and useful phrases for everyday life. Sophie's kindness made Ella feel comfortable. She decided to try speaking more. I like books, she said slowly, making sure to pronounce each word carefully. I read before bed. Sophie nodded. That's a great habit. Reading helps a lot with language learning. Do you like stories about adventure or romance? Ella took a moment to think. I like adventure. Big stories. Then I have the perfect book for you, Sophie said, pulling a book from the shelf. This one is about a girl who travels the world. It's fun and easy to read. Ella held the book in her hands, feeling a mix of excitement and gratitude. Thank you for help. Anytime, Sophie said warmly. And remember, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Speaking is the best way to learn. Ella left the bookstore feeling lighter. That short conversation had been a breakthrough. For the first time, she had spoken to a stranger without feeling overwhelmed. From that day on, Ella made a goal to speak with at least one new person each day. She started small, practicing in places where conversations were simple, ordering at cafes, asking shopkeepers about products, or greeting neighbors. One morning, she went to a bakery near her apartment. The baker, an elderly man with a thick mustache, smiled at her. Good morning. What would you like today? Ella hesitated for only a second before saying, I want one croissant and coffee. The baker nodded. Would you like sugar in your coffee? Ella blinked, quickly processing the question. Yes, little sugar. Coming right up. When he handed her the tray, she smiled and said, Thank you. Have a nice day. You too, the baker replied. It was a short conversation, but it gave her a boost of confidence. She had spoken naturally, without overthinking every word. Encouraged by her progress, Ella decided to push herself further. She visited a local park, hoping to practice speaking with more people. She saw a woman sitting on a bench, feeding pigeons. Gathering her courage, she approached and said, Hello. Nice day. The woman looked up and smiled. Yes, it is. The sun is finally out. Are you new here? Ella nodded. Yes. I come from Spain. I learn English. That's wonderful. London is a great place to learn. Lots of friendly people to practice with. Ella relaxed, feeling the conversation flow. Yes, people kind. I like city. They chatted for a few more minutes, with Ella using hand gestures when words escaped her. The woman was patient and understanding, waiting for Ella to find the right words. Not every conversation was smooth. There were times when Ella struggled, forgot words, or said something incorrect. One evening, she went to a grocery store and tried to ask a worker where to find milk. Excuse me, where the milk? She asked. The worker looked puzzled. Where is the milk? He corrected gently. Ella flushed. Yes, where is the milk? The worker pointed to an aisle. Right there. She thanked him and walked away, feeling embarrassed. But later, she reminded herself that the mistake didn't matter. What mattered was that she had spoken and been understood. As weeks passed, Ella grew more confident. She no longer felt as nervous when speaking. She started having longer conversations and even asked strangers about their days. One day, she returned to Sophie's bookstore. Hello, Sophie, she greeted cheerfully. Sophie beamed. Ella, how's your English coming along? Better. I speak more. Still not perfect, but I try. That's the spirit. I can see the improvement already. Ella felt a rush of pride. She had come a long way from struggling with simple sentences. She still made mistakes, but she no longer feared them. Every conversation was a step toward fluency. Ella knew that learning a language required consistency, so she made a structured plan to improve her English skills. She started by watching English movies with subtitles. At first, it was difficult. She could only catch a few words here and there, and sometimes she had to pause to understand the dialogue. But she didn't give up. She started with children's movies, which had simple language and clear pronunciation. As she watched, she would repeat certain phrases, mimicking the actors' accents and intonations. She kept a notebook where she wrote down new words, their meanings, and example sentences. Every night, she reviewed her notes, making sure to use the new words in her daily life. Ella also began reading simple books. She started with short stories meant for English learners. The first book she picked up was about a young girl traveling to different countries. The sentences were short, and the vocabulary was easy to understand, which made reading enjoyable rather than frustrating. She used a dictionary whenever she found a word she didn't know, and over time, she needed it less and less. One day, while visiting Sophie's bookstore, she asked, "Do you have books for people learning English?" Sophie nodded. "Of course. Here's one that is both English and your native language side by side. It can help you understand better." Ella took the book and started reading immediately. She noticed that the more she read, the better her sentence structure became. She even tried writing short diary entries in English. Determined to improve her speaking skills further, Ella joined a local English club where learners gathered to practice conversations. At her first meeting, she felt nervous. The room was filled with people from different backgrounds, all trying to speak English just like her. The club leader, a cheerful man named Tom, greeted her. "Welcome. We're happy to have you here. Don't worry about mistakes. Just speak." During the first session, they played a simple game. Everyone had to introduce themselves and share one fun fact. When it was Ella's turn, she took a deep breath and said, "Hello, my name is Ella. I like books and traveling." Everyone smiled and clapped. It was a small sentence, but it was a big achievement for her. As the weeks went by, she attended the club regularly. She participated in discussions, played word games, and even tried storytelling exercises. As she practiced, she noticed something amazing. She was no longer afraid of speaking. Before, she would hesitate, worrying about making mistakes. But in the English club, she realized that everyone was learning and no one was judging her. One evening, the club organized a conversation challenge. Each participant had to talk about a topic for 1 full minute. When Ella's turn came, she spoke about her experience moving to London. Her sentences weren't perfect, but she spoke confidently. When she finished, everyone applauded. "You did great," Tom said. "Your English has improved a lot." Ella beamed with pride. She had come so far from the girl who once hesitated to order coffee. Outside of the club, Ella found more ways to practice. She spoke with neighbors, chatted with Sophie at the bookstore, and even started using English when texting friends. She made a habit of thinking in English rather than translating from her native language. One day, she was at a grocery store when an elderly woman asked her for help. "Excuse me, dear. Can you reach that cereal box for me?" Ella smiled and replied naturally, "Of course. Here you go." "Thank you, sweetheart. You're very kind." Ella walked away, feeling accomplished. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't translated in her head. She had simply responded. Looking back, Ella realized how much she had improved. She no longer felt embarrassed when she spoke. She felt proud. Step by step, she had built her confidence. Now, she could hold conversations, understand movies, and read books in English. One evening, she sat in a cafe, reading an English novel. The waiter approached her and asked, "Would you like anything else?" Ella looked up and, without thinking, replied, "No, thank you. I'm just enjoying my book." And for the first time, she truly felt like she belonged. Months later, Ella was no longer the shy girl afraid of speaking English. The transformation had been incredible. She had gone from hesitating over simple greetings to confidently engaging in conversations with colleagues, strangers, and even helping others who were in the same position she had once been in. At work, she had become an active participant in meetings. She no longer feared raising her hand to share her thoughts. One day, her manager asked for ideas on improving customer service, and without thinking, Ella said, "I think we should have a suggestion box for customers. It will help us understand their needs better." Her colleagues nodded in agreement. "That's a great idea, Ella," her manager said. The compliment made her heart swell with pride. She had spoken naturally, without overthinking every word, and most importantly, she had been understood. Outside of work, Ella's social life flourished. She had made new friends, many of whom spoke English fluently. Instead of avoiding conversations, she now actively participated in them. She enjoyed meeting at cafes, going on weekend trips, and having long discussions about books and movies. One evening, she met her friend Sophie at a cozy cafe. "Remember when I first came to your bookstore?" Ella laughed. "I could barely say a full sentence without stopping." Sophie smiled. "And now look at you. You're chatting away like a native." Ella realized how true that was. She still made mistakes, but she no longer let them hold her back. Every mistake was just another step in her learning journey. One day, Ella noticed a young woman struggling to order coffee at a cafe. The woman looked nervous, much like Ella had been when she first arrived in London. Ella stepped forward and gently asked, "Do you need help?" The woman's eyes lit up with relief. "Yes, please. My English not good." Ella smiled warmly. "Don't worry. I understand. What would you like to order?" As the woman hesitated, Ella guided her through the process, just as Sophie and others had once helped her. When the order was complete, the woman looked at her gratefully. "Thank you so much. It's scary to speak sometimes." "I know," Ella said, nodding. "But it gets easier. Just keep speaking." That moment made Ella realize how far she had come. She had not only learned English, but had also gained the confidence to help others on the same journey. One evening, as she walked through the vibrant streets of London, Ella reflected on her journey. She had once thought that learning English was about getting every word right, avoiding mistakes, and sounding perfect. But now she understood the real secret. Language was not about perfection, but about communication. She no longer felt nervous before speaking. She no longer worried about making mistakes. She spoke because she wanted to connect with people, to share stories, to learn about the world around her. As she stood on a bridge, overlooking the Thames, she smiled. She had achieved what once seemed impossible, and she knew that no matter where life took her, she would always have the courage to speak. If Ella can do it, so can you. Remember, learning English is a journey, and every small step counts. Keep practicing, and one day you'll speak English fluently too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs motivation. See you in the next video on English Tone.